Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of The Other Side of Things. This will be Part 4, Chapter 4, entitled Todoroki Needs a Pep Talk. The man down in the alley seemed to be your average addict, fidgety from withdrawal and gaunt with atrophied muscles. Heavy hands fell on the boy's shoulders, and the raspy breath that filtered through All for One's temporary support system sent shivers down his spine. "What's wrong?" his voice asked with a sickening sweetness. "It shouldn't be hard." The boy knew that it wasn't. The man in the alley was already halfway through death's door. It wouldn't take much to finish the job. The boy hated that he knew this the moment he'd laid eyes on him. In a way, he felt silly, really. So long he'd spent wishing for a quirk, and now that he had one, he refused to use it. But he wanted to be a hero. And heroes don't use their quirks on innocent people, don't use them to kill and prove their worth to villains and boogeymen. But did he ever have a choice? "Do I have to educate you again?" Cold dread gripped the boy's heart in an iron grasp, lungs constricted by burning vices. He shook his head no. "Good," All for One cooed. "Kurogiri." There was black and burning ozone and nothingness, and then he stood right behind the shaking man unnoticed. He tried to remember the specifics of his new quirk, what Sensei had told him, and gulped. Activating it was a struggle, as it always was. Keeping it active was torture, as it always was. But when the boy thought of the villain who had ruined his life, ripped him from his mother, the heavy weight on his chest felt lighter. When he thought of All for One, keeping the quirk active was a breeze. When he thought of All for One, using it on an innocent man was so easy. When the boy thought of being educated, the scars on his body burned and his quirk flared, the intense emotions burning in his gut, feeding its power. A last kick to the man's head extinguished his life as easily as the flame of a candle. He breathed heavily, less from exertion and more from the emotional turmoil as a part of him died. There was no going back, he knew, as he was engulfed by black nothingness once more. He'd made his bed, now to lie in it. Izuku is shaken out of his reverie when he almost runs into the front door of the announcer booth. He shakes his head in an attempt to clear the memories from his mind and takes a deep breath, holds for two, and lets it out for two more, finally feeling like he can play the part again. "All the world's a stage," he whispers and smirks, quickly opening the door before he could lose himself in memories again. Yamada and Aizawa turn to look at him as he enters, the former smirking the moment his eyes fall on the hoodie he's wearing. Aizawa, meanwhile, merely stares blankly, evidently unsure what to say. Tilting his head, Izuku raises an eyebrow. "Is something the matter, Eraser? Cat got your tongue?" "Are you really?" the hero starts, voice dripping with waning patience. "Wearing a hoodie the exact same color as your hair, saying villainous cinnamon roll." "Why? Do you want one? I'm sure I could find you one with cat ears on the hood if you ask me nicely." Aizawa shakes his head slowly, turning back around to the wide glass window. "And here I was, under the impression that villains had a fashion sense." "Oh?" Izuku leans back, hands clasped behind his back. He feels his smirk slowly morph into a genuine smile. "Did you really just joke around with me, Eraser? Growing on you, am I?" "Like a fungus," he deadpans, waving at the chair between him and Yamada. "Now sit down and do whatever Nezu wants you to do, and do it quietly. You're already giving me a migraine." Smile still firmly in place, Izuku takes the offered seat and takes out a notebook and pen from his black laptop bag. Putting them down on the console before them, he then bends to take out a thermos next. Izuku's smile turns slightly vindictive as Aizawa longingly stares at the freshly poured coffee. He raises an eyebrow, offering him the thermos. "Got a mug?" And as the plain black coffee pours into his mug, Shota could concede that the brat wasn't all bad, if only just. Izuku yawns watching the tail end of the cavalry battle. The coffee had evidently not been enough to keep him awake and focused throughout the first 2 rounds, not beyond writing down any notes and observations on 1A's quirks and any strengths and weaknesses to expand upon at any rate. There were just no surprises. Todoroki had narrowly won the obstacle race against Katsuki, and judging by the scoreboard, most of 1A would make it to the 3rd round. Really, the only surprise had been the girl from support, and even her wackiness isn't able to keep him awake. though he figured talking to her would be a whole other matter. He stifles another yawn. If you're bored, don't bother coming back after lunch. He snaps around to Aizawa, who is looking at him instead of the battle. Izuku shrugs. It's not that it's not interesting, it's just... He vaguely waves at the center of the stadium. Predictable. What do you mean? Yamada has his eyebrows raised in confusion. Izuku looks at him for a moment before he leans back in his seat, stretching out his arms to work out the kinks. Most of 1B won't make it. Not because they're bad, but because they just lack experience. He taps his chin with a finger, contemplative. Someone from 1A will win, I think. Shinzo might get lucky and get to the semis or the final. Katsuki and Todoroki don't need luck. They'll make it for sure. From what I've seen, most of the girls who make it to the 1v1 battles should get to the quarterfinals unless they get really bad matchups, since their quirks are more versatile. It all depends on the pairings, though. He finishes, looking back at Yamada with a shrug. Yamada looks at him over the rim of his glasses, eyebrows raised. You sound awfully sure of yourself. Everyone gets things wrong sometimes, you know. True, Izuku concedes, smirking sharply. But I don't make it a habit. Too much trouble, you know. There is a choked cough to their right, and they both turn to see Aizawa valiantly trying and failing to cover his chuckle with his capture weapon. Izuku's smirk grows smug. Knew I was growing on you. Izuku decides to take Aizawa up on his offer, so after lunch he makes his way towards the seats reserved for 1A, idly wondering how they'll react to his sudden presence when he almost runs into Endeavor's back. He makes a split-second decision, glad for the man's broad frame, and ducks back behind the corner he just came from, pressing his back against the wall and straining his ears. He'd never quite learned to not be nosy. Are you still not done throwing your little temper tantrum, Shoto? It's not a tantrum. Todoroki's voice is as passive and flat as it always is, but underneath it and barely perceptible, there's a smoldering rage Izuku doesn't expect. He raises an eyebrow, crossing his arms over his chest as he continues to eavesdrop. I didn't create you for you to throw half of your power to the wayside, boy. Izuku's blood runs cold. You already know my answer to that, old man. There's the sound of retreating steps fading into the distance, angry growls from Endeavor, and then the hero too leaves. Izuku sighs, now alone in the hallway. I should have stayed with the League. Less baggage. The class turns around to look at him as one, only missing Shinso. Izuku guesses he's off to prepare for his fight against Monoma, and he'd bet good money that he'll win. Katsuki averts his gaze first, turning back to the field and shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Ida frowns. What are you doing here? It sounds accusatory, though the boy probably didn't intend it to. Izuku just shrugs and sits down in an empty seat in the front row, leaving one seat empty between him and Todoroki to his right. He figures he might as well give them all space. Aizawa told me to fuck off. Kaminari smirks. You that annoying? Very, he deadpans, but when he locks eyes with the other teen, he can't help but smirk. In the arena, Shinso and Monoma walk across the field towards each other, and he lets his voice sound a bit more genuine as he takes out a notebook and pen. Honestly, I think Aizawa just didn't want me to be bored. I barely managed to stay awake during the first 2 rounds. Izuku can see their faces from the corner of his eyes, so he amends, not really feeling up to his usual antagonism. I was mostly bored because I'm supposed to focus on your class, and the first 2 rounds don't allow for much of that. I'm sure these 1v1 battles will be more interesting for me. Suddenly, Ashido thrusts her head over his shoulder, looking at his notes with an interest he hadn't seen from her before. He startles. Who do you think will win? He looks back at the arena and frowns. Depends. If Shinzo figured out Monoma's quirk and gets him before they touch, he wins. It kinda depends on whether Monoma is an idiot, though. And it goes as he predicted, Shinzo exploiting Monoma's usual antics the moment midnight gives them the go-ahead. The blonde is out of bounds in under a minute, and Izuku sighs. He watches Todoroki curb-stomp Sarah with a frown, worried despite himself. I didn't create you for you to throw half of your power to the wayside, boy. The exchange repeats in his head, over and over, while Todoroki melts his classmate from a giant glacier of his own creation. Izuku stands, suddenly startling the other teenagers. I'll be right back, he mutters distractedly, shoving his notebook and pen back into his laptop bag and slinging it over his shoulder, rushing up the stairs. Wait! Isuku pauses, turning back to Kirishima. At least tell us who you think will win the next round. He shrugs, already making his way up the stairs again. The girl from 1B. Her vines can serve as lightning rods, and Kaminari will fry his brain immediately. Back in the class seats, Shinso raises an eyebrow. Is he really wearing a hoodie that reads villainous cinnamon roll? His classmates' laughter is all the answer he gets. He manages to intercept Todoroki halfway between the arena exit and the class seats. Before the other teenager can even say anything, he grabs his left wrist and drags him to a nearby storage closet. Once the doors close behind them, Todoroki finally speaks. What do you want? Izuku crosses his arms over his chest, locking eyes with him. For a moment, his gaze lingers on the scar covering half his face. Earlier, I overheard you in Endeavor. Todoroki frowns, and his usually passive voice gains an edge. Of course a villain would eavesdrop on private conversations, go figure. There's nothing private about talking in a public hallway. Izuku shrugs, but doesn't deny the accusation of eavesdropping. It's not like he's wrong. What he mentioned. Endeavor bought your mom, didn't he? Something flashes in Todoroki's eyes, but it disappears almost as quickly as it came. Izuku can appreciate the kind of self-control that only comes with training or abuse. He has a good idea which one applies to Todoroki Shoto. Todoroki takes a deep breath, not meeting his eyes. It was a quirk marriage, if that's what you mean. Izuku nods, more to himself than for the other's benefit. I get why you don't want to use your left side, then. Todoroki's expression shifts in surprise, and he just uncrosses his arms and puts his hands in the pockets of his hoodie. I understand, maybe better than most, why you won't use the part of your quirk that you got from him. Their eyes lock again, and something in Todoroki's gaze breaks Izuku's mask. He swallows, cursing his lapse in self-control. I was born quirkless. The villain who kidnapped me has the ability to take and give quirks at will, and he forced one onto me in an attempt to buy my loyalty. He breathes in, holds for 2, then releases for 2. When he continues, his voice is steadier. This quirk doesn't fit me, but even if it did, I wouldn't like using it if I could help it. It feels wrong, like I'm just giving him more control when I use it after all. Izuku steps towards Todoroki then, grabbing his shoulders. I'm not telling you to use it, because that would make me a hypocrite. In the end, I'm not using a power I see as evil the same as you. But... He looks away for a moment, then meets his eyes again, frowning. Do you think it's fair to your classmates to hold back? Aren't you just giving Endeavor control over you in a different way in the end? Todoroki frowns. What? Izuku licks his lip, taking back his hands and averting his eyes. You essentially act this way despite him, so in the end your every action is influenced by the thought of him. He's exerting control over you when all you want is to be free of him. I feel like this goes both ways then. Todoroki blinks at him like a cat, and Izuku almost laughs. Maybe, he concedes, slowly putting his mask back into place. He keeps his voice as genuine as he dares, opting to be sincere for at least the rest of their conversation. But I wasn't born with my quirk, was I? In the end, their little talk isn't enough to change Todoroki's mind about his fire, and Izuku hadn't expected it to. A conviction of years born from so much resentment and abuse can't be overcome by one short pep talk. Izuku still hopes it might help the other teenager down the line, though. Both of them make it back to Class 1A in time to see Hatsume step out of bounds to let Ida win, and judging from the dejected look on Kaminari's face, Izuku had been right about that particular matchup, too. Izuku sits back down, taking out his notebook and pen in preparation for Ashido's and Aoyama's match to start. He flinches when his police-commissioned phone starts ringing in his bag, and he unlocks it to read Tsukauchi's message with a frown. His blood runs cold. What's the matter? Izuku jerks his head around, startled, and almost drops his phone. Fuck, he thinks. Those kids were getting to him. He looks at Shinso and shrugs, easily slipping his mask back on. Nothing much, just an update for an investigation I'm helping with. Izuku holds Shinso's intense gaze, not giving an inch. After a few moments of staring, the other teen scoffs and turns back to the arena. Must be one hell of an update. You look like you've seen a ghost. Izuku frowns and suppresses a curse. Fuck these kids and the way they were getting to him. Focusing back on his phone, he types a quick message to Aizawa, even if it was probably pointless. He doubts Tsukauchi hadn't informed his prison warden, considering he'd been requesting to help on site. Hosu, here I come, I guess. Izuku is sitting in the 1A classroom, ignoring the students while he once again sorts through the massive stacks of stapled and color-coded papers to make sure he hadn't forgotten any in his room. He's pretty sure he's already cost you 3 toner cartridges with the sheer amount of printing he's done so far. But hey, as long as he's not paying, who cares? The bell rings and Aizawa comes in, the class quieting down immediately. Next week, you'll all be going on internships. They'll only be 1 week long for now, as a sort of first taste of the real thing. He begins without preamble, blunt as ever. Some pros have extended offers to you depending on how you did in the festival, and I expect you to hand in your decision by the end of the week. Midoriya will now hand you your offers along with whatever Nezu made him do. You have the rest of the period to look through your paperwork. If you have questions, pester him, not me. With that, he slips inside his sleeping bag and goes to take a nap in the corner. Rolling his eyes at his antics, Izuku steps up to hand out the massive stacks, his voice unusually cheerful. Principal Nezu asked me to create portfolios analyzing your quirks. I went ahead and included possible ways you could use them that you might not have considered before, as well as potential support item additions for your costumes and which areas of your fighting style you should improve. Oh, he smirks as he hands Ida his stack, the corner of an envelope poking out from between the pages. I also highlighted the internships I think would be most beneficial to you, and made notes on why I chose them, but the decision is obviously up to you. I was just bored. Tenya tries to meet Midoriya's eyes, but the villain, was he still a villain even, resolutely ignores him, as he makes his way down the rows. You can always ask me about anything that's unclear in these notes. I have a habit of getting carried away. While Midoriya walks back to the front of the classroom, takes out his glasses and focuses on his laptop, essentially ignoring them all, Tenya fishes the envelope out from between the pages of his offers. Discreet as he can manage, he puts the envelope in his bag, opting to read it later. Because right now, he has to find a pro-hero stationed in Hosu. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 4 of The Other Side of Things. Chapter 5 will be up next. Hope you all are still enjoying this fic, and as always, thank you so much for listening.